Hello, wonderful assessors. This is Julia and Erin, and I've
Hello,
told
hello.
Erin all about the incredible presentation you did on constructed response. I think the key thing to remember about constructed response that's so important is that it is not for cowards. That if you are going to write good constructed response, you really, really, really need to commit to taking the time to do it well. And so as the group did the best presentation ever today, and these are just some pieces of information that kind of go beyond what was in our chapter. And we talked today about the cube and where that falls into play, and know that the difference between a constructed response and a selected response is basically that in a constructed response, the learner needs to generate the answer, not point to it or recognize it. There are generally considered to be three types of constructed response. One is restricted, and what that means is that when you are creating the question, you restrict the answer to a short answer, a fill in the blank, or sometimes you'll ask students to generate a list or identify the order of operations. The second type is an extended construction response, which is longer and requires heavy thinking on the part of the student, otherwise it's not worth doing. And the third is an interpretive constructed response, which of course employs that facet of interpretation, and is oftentimes used for student interpreting of works of art, and that's the major use for it. So, in constructed response,
You are asking students to give reasons, define, or list. This is more at the explain level. A lot of times when we're looking at the FACES, and it's a lot easier for quick feedback. So this is where you're looking for a more diagnostic tool instead of them pointing to an answer. This is where you ask them to list or put something in order or to explain why or how something is happening. So this would be the restricted constructed response, short answer. You're taking away the word bank, you're taking away the options, and they're constructing that meaning and that answer on their own.
so you want to make sure that when you're asking questions that are restricted response, that you're asking things you want them to memorize, you want them to have the top of their head. You want them to be able to recall on demand. When you're writing the question, don't use an unfinished sentence. Ask a direct question.
So when we say fill in the blank, you're not leaving a blank in the middle of the question, just as you did with your selected response items, you're writing as a complete question.
So the big one, the extended constructive response, can give you immense freedom, and you use it only when you're going to measure complex thought. If you're asking them to recall or regurgitate, there's so many other ways that you can do that. This looks at measuring knowledge mastery and their capacity to reason, and this really you should only use it for significant instructional outcomes. Making sure that you're considering, as the group told us today, that these are time consuming, they're wonderful assessments, but that students need to be proficient in writing English.
And that could also come into play given the age level of your learners as well, for those of you who are K-12 or work with the fives.
One of the things that the group went over so beautifully today was that were these three pieces: identify your priorities, one task, a completely single and novel task, and to make sure that you articulate your criteria.
So the step, and it seems like a lot, and it can sometimes be overwhelming when you see these big essay questions, but the reality is it's actually much easier for your learner when they have these three parts. So the first part is to set a clear and specific context. Remind your students where they are, set that foundation, seat them in that point of learning or that place of knowledge where this question is coming from.
When students are under duress, it's very important to bring them back to earth and put them within a time frame. Make sure that your second part of the question specifies as the kind of reason: analyze, describe, or to compare and contrast. Whatever it is you're asking them to do, clearly identify that. It's always a good idea to bold those words or underline those words.
And we'll have a slide later on with Bell's 12 words. Those are the words that you want to use to specify the type of reasoning that you expect to see in this type of answer.
The third part of a really good extended response points the way to a good response without giving away the answer. And in class, you had such a beautiful example of this. And there's another one right here. This is the whole thing all put together. As you notice, the question's long, and that's right. They should be long.
So instead of just saying discuss this or tell me about this, you've specified, you've set the way, and you're going to find that it's actually a really nice set of directions for your students, and as you are grading it, you will get much better results and outcomes when you specify exactly what you want and expect from your students.
So make sure that you use them to what they're created to do, to analyze artwork, to interpret music or scientific data, to solve a problem, to compare and contrast solutions, events, and pieces of literature.
Here are the 12 words. I have this slide printed off and I leave it right there on my desk along with Bloom's Wheel from last semester. These are just the words that I always go back to when I'm trying to figure out what exactly I'm asking my students to do. I go to this slide and use it as a reference and use those when constructing my questions. And you'll see these again when we look at journals.
And you can always memorize these because they're really good to know. So a couple things that we hear from Popham, who's the guy we're not reading, and really sometimes he's kind of a smart aleck, but to make sure that that your constructed response conveys a clear idea, that the task is described, that you don't provide optional items, and that you know what it is you're asking before you start the question. If you are using it as an interpretive response, which is a third and fabulous use for an extended response, this is when they don't have to master the material, but you're looking at reasoning, their capacity to compare and contrast across maps, across works of art. And this kind of extended response is oftentimes used on standardized tests, so it's always kind of a nice idea to practice it somewhere in somebody's educational career.
All right, so these are thou shalt not, again from Popham, of course, as we've reiterated multiple times, one of the first tools that we explain as assessors is to always use clear directions. Please do write your sample items as if it was an actual test you'd hand out to your students. Don't be ambiguous.
Don't be ambiguous with your antecedents. It's important that if you're going to say use pronouns like him, her, it, them, then, that you identify what those are. Don't have the students think that they should know. Don't give them unintentional clues. That's why it's important to have somebody else read your questions. Don't use complex syntax, and don't use more vocabulary that's more advanced that require. And this is a good example of really stupid, awful vocabulary in the parentheses. Couple things.
Don't say who, what, where, or list unless you're looking for a restricted response. Use words that will open up the conversation in the answer. Do use why, describe, explain, those Dr. Bell's words. Don't ever say discuss. And don't permit choice questions if it results in students being able to opt out of showing that they know or do not know something.
So the things to consider about extended response is 1, could the students answer the question without an in-depth understanding of the topic or concept? Then no, don't use that question. 2, could the answer be ill-constructed but the student absolutely understand the ideas? Then figure that out and score according to that construction. And 3, and Erin and I are going to say this together, could the question be more efficiently answered using selected response than use selected response? So here's a rubric to take a look at as you're constructing your own, because guess what? We have an assignment for you. So we would like you to choose a chapter from a textbook or reference material in your content area. Based on that chapter, we're going to practice with some constructed response. 1 is a restricted response, short answer, or fill in the blank. 2
is a restricted response requiring students to list or order in their answer. And then the third one is the big essay or extended response. Be sure to follow the guidelines that the group provided you with, and also the slides previously that laid out each of those. And as always, remember to use clear directions and point values for your learners.
We are excited to see how you work with this. Please remember, constructed response is not for cowards, so put your brave armor on and go at it. We are thrilled to be able to take a look. Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.